Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently, and Thriving Teams, When Teams Unite, Align and Achieve. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently. I interview thought leaders from across the globe. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Many leaders I work with are feeling the tension between wanting to build high-performing teams and wanting to do it in a way that feels human, sustainable, and grounded in trust. If you've ever wondered how to create a culture that empowers people to do their best work, especially in a remote environment, today's episode is for you. I'm joined by Ryan Griffin, Managing Director of Chunky Duck, a creative and performance agency known for its people-first culture and its refreshing modern approach to leadership. Ryan's pathway to leadership is anything but linear. In our conversation, we explore the power of process thinking, how marginal gains transform performance, what a duck up is, and what it really takes to support a team when you can't see them every day. This conversation is so important right now because leaders everywhere are rethinking how to build teams that thrive. Let's dive in. I'm thrilled to welcome Ryan Griffin to the Thriving Leaders podcast. Ryan is the Managing Director of Chunky Duck, a creative agency known for its people-first culture, remote team, innovation, and redefining what it means to lead with empathy and intention. Ryan's path to leadership hasn't been conventional. He played college baseball in the States. He had a quarter-life crisis and went backpacking across South America and has been a shark diver, so keen to find out more about that. But what he's best known for is building a thriving agency rooted in trust, autonomy, and human connection, which I'm definitely going to deep dive on today. In today's conversation, we're going to talk about what it takes to build a high-performing remote team, around process thinking, and also what a duck up is. So really looking forward to the discussion with Ryan, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Claire. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Let's jump in.
Awesome. So you had a pretty interesting journey to get to this point. Can you tell us a little bit about your career path to get to Chunky Duck?
Yeah, it's definitely not the typical path that you see many founders take, but I've often found many founders do have quite a odd story. For myself, life really kicked off when I was 17 years old. I was selected in the Australian schoolboys baseball team. That gave me a great intro into the world of US sports, and I ended up getting a scholarship to the US. So if any of you out there that have kids that are good at sport, I came back with a couple of degrees and no HECS debt, which was a huge leg up in life. From there, I started in a performance agency. I was there for 3 or 4 years. I then had a couple of surgeries that kind of derailed my life for about 10 months. I'd put on about 20 kilos. I was physically and mentally exhausted, and decided that the best thing to do was to ride a bicycle across South America. So I started in the very bottom and rode to the top. Came back and pivoted my life into out of client services and into animal care. I worked at Sydney Aquarium as one of the occupational divers there, cleaning the exhibits, feeding the sharks, the penguins, all of that kind of, probably the funnest job I think I've ever had up to that point. COVID came along and a whole bunch of us got made redundant from that. And that's really when I started to consider going back into the world of marketing. 6 months later, Chunky Duck was founded, and kind of the rest is history since then.
Awesome. So what was your top 1 or 2 highlights when bike riding South America?
Yeah, Machu Picchu was definitely one of the main highlights when I got into Peru. It's something that I'd wanted to be there and get to that for a long point. There was 10,000 kilometers of riding to get to that point. So it was quite a milestone for me to be able to reach that. So that was certainly one of the highlights. I think looking back, for me, it's probably how much it's defined me as a person, and living in a country or in a continent where everyone warned me to be careful and to take care of myself. I found such a welcoming and kind population of people, and I've tried to replicate that as much as possible in my life and my work as well.
Yeah, it's often those defining moments that we don't expect where we learn a lot about ourselves. And I recall doing Machu Picchu, not on a bike, on foot, but it's pretty amazing that they built, like the Incans built a whole society so high up at altitude. And yeah, it's pretty phenomenal. Awesome. From a work perspective, for those who might not know what you do and might not be familiar with your work, can you describe what it is that you do and why that matters?
Yeah, I'm managing director at an oddly named agency called Chunky Duck. We're a creative and performance agency. Most of my background has been working in the world of PPC, so Google Ads and Facebook ads are the main ones. And really, the business kind of evolved out of three freelancers looking to save some cash on accounting fees. We formed one business, and we now find ourselves 4 years later with 15 employees. I really feel like we have the business of the future. We have a fully remote workspace. We have flexible working days, flexible working hours. It's just a bunch of incredible people doing incredible work. And yeah, I feel like I've really hit the jackpot with what we have so far.
Awesome. And how did you arrive at Chunky Duck?
It's a little bit odd. Before the world of AI, we threw it into a random agency name generator. And that was
Yeah.
the very first thing that came out. We wrote it down and we had a bit of a chuckle and then tried to come up with something better. Took us about 2 months. Everyone kept asking us what we were going to call the business. And we said, look, we're not 100% sure just yet, but we think that we're going to call it Chunky Duck. And everyone that we told that to either smiled or giggled or had just a really positive physical response to hearing that name. And my thought was simply there are brands all over the world that would love to have such a positive response simply upon hearing their name. And that was enough for us to decide that Chunky Duck was what we were going to be.
Awesome. I love it. It's like when people haven't fully named a child and they're like, we're thinking it could be this, like for the first month, and testing the reactions that they'll get. So, yeah. Awesome. So, I know that you love process thinking, and for a lot of our listeners, they probably don't know what process thinking is. They can probably make a few assumptions based on the name, but what is process thinking and why is it so important?
Yeah, process thinking is really focusing on the daily actions and behaviors that you can control rather than looking into the future. So often, whether it's in sport and focusing on winning a championship, or whether it's in business and looking 10 years ahead at a big buyout, it's quite difficult to connect where we are today to where we are in the future. And process thinking is really bringing it back down to, well, what can I control? What can I control not only this year or this month or this day, but even within this hour? How can I make it a little bit better than it was in the past?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because, like, I facilitate a lot of strategy sessions, and we might say, where do we want to be in 5 years' time? And people find it really difficult to think that far into the future as well. So, I guess it's about the incremental change that you can make now and in the short term to help influence the long term, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it certainly is. As a personal example, a couple of months ago, I was finding myself in some quite what I call poor habits, staying up a little bit late, snacking at 10 p.m. at night, everything that indicated that I probably wasn't moving enough. I had a high cortisol and stress. And so for me, I know that to get back into a good place, I need to move and I need to exercise. And so simply by making 15 to 30 minutes in my daily schedule to exercise, I know that within a couple of weeks, I'm really going to see the positive impact from just making sure I give it that time. And process thinking is that same way of ensuring that if I do the right things over and over again, the results will come. And I just need to trust that that will work.
Mm. So it's like creating new habits. What does that actually look like if we were to create 15 to 20 minutes in our day to process think? How would we do that and what does that look like?
Yeah, in terms of how we do it for myself, it's really about understanding what it is that my goals and what I'm trying to achieve. We often hear from clients, I need X amount of leads per month, but how many leads are driven by social posts or by running performance marketing or your email newsletter, and being able to understand what are the small tasks that I can take that achieve the greater result is really about kind of understanding where that connection is between those two. And so for us and at Chunky Duck, process thinking is really part of our strategic model. As you may know, Claire, ducks migrate. And so each year we have the Chunky Duck migration, where all of the ducks fly into Noosa for a week of workshops and planning and fun. And it's in those sessions that we kind of outline all the things that are going well, all the things that aren't, and kind of how can we make them a little bit better. And that kind of forms everything from our OKR framework to our one-on-one catch-ups with our manager, really forms the whole foundational basis of how we work as an agency.
Yeah, I like the ducks migrating and coming together for a week. And I guess when you aren't always face to face, being intentional to create that space to do that. So how have you applied process thinking with your teams at Chunky Duck?
Yeah, it's very much about how we help the team member understand that their small actions contribute to the greater good. So often, I think team members struggle to understand that, well, why am I doing this? Or is this really that important? Or do I need to do this? Could I do something else instead? And helping them understand that it is all these small achievements that are stacked on top of each other, which help us achieve the greater good overall. As an example, we have a goal this year to increase our revenue by 30%. Now, what that breaks down to is hundreds of little tasks that are done throughout the year. So it's ensuring that we're present across things like social media channels, that we're publishing the case studies of the work that we do. We're at a certain amount of networking events. We might also need to upgrade our pitch decks, maybe improve the response time to those pitches, increase rates to current clients, even just send thank you Christmas gifts, all a part of kind of achieving that greater goal of increasing revenue. It's much easier for the team to buy in and understand when you break it down into smaller executable tasks that are a little bit less vague.
Yeah. So would it be fair to say, like from an OKR perspective, that process thinking is almost like the initiatives to contribute to your measures of success that you're setting for yourself?
Yeah, it certainly is. I think the goal is often that key result. And so, what is it, the number that we're trying to achieve or get to? And the objectives are all those small tasks that contribute towards that. And so, for us, it's really about understanding. And there's a little bit of leap between process thinking and marginal gains theory, where you're looking at, well, here are all the things that I can control. If I make them all a little bit better, is that going to help us achieve this result? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you can do all the little tasks and still don't hit the goal. But that's a key part of the learning process of going, okay, we did all the things that we thought would contribute to this result. That didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Was there something else that we needed to do? Was there something unexpected that we didn't anticipate? Was there something that was the reason why we didn't achieve that? And so that kind of forms part of that annual cycle where we review what went well and what didn't. And do we truly understand, or do we need to do something different next year to achieve that same goal?
Yeah. So you mentioned marginal gains theory. For our listeners that might not be aware of what that is, how would you describe what that is?
Yeah, marginal gains was really made quite popular for the London, I think it was the 2012 Olympics, where the British team won their greatest ever amount of medals. And what it really focused on was, what is everything that I have control over as an athlete to improve my performance? So often we think about the training programs and nutrition, but this went all the way down to the nth degree of, well, what socks are you wearing while you compete? What pillow are you sleeping on? What mattress type? Taking every single area of your life that you can control and trying to make it a little bit better. In the same way, in a Formula One race car, if you need to lose a kilo, you don't pick one item and just cut a whole kilo out. You might pick 1,000 and take 1 gram each, and that'll help you achieve that same goal. And so it's about focusing on all of the different areas in your life that you can influence and just trying to make them a little bit better. If you've read Atomic Habits, that's probably one of the best descriptors of how the cumulative impact of small change makes a big difference. And yeah, I'm a big believer in marginal gains theory.
Yeah. And I think even like the diary of the CEO, he talks a lot about like all the one making things 1% better. I'm actually facilitating a session on Thursday around how do we create a culture of optimization and how do we have an optimization mindset. I'm thinking about how process thinking would help with that. What are your thoughts around having an optimization mindset and how process thinking could help with that?
Yeah, I think the main advantage of process thinking is it really helps the team understand what's asked of them, but also helps link it to an overall or a greater goal or a vision. Often, employees in larger businesses, especially ones that are maybe lower down the corporate ladder, they often have difficulty understanding, well, I'm doing all of these things, but I don't really understand where the impact is of that or whether my work is actually valued or it has an impact at all. And so for us, process thinking and helping people understand that their contributions add up and help over time, I think makes it a lot easier for them to see value out of their role. It's also easier to measure their outputs. They're more tangible than they would be if they're just simple targets. It's also easier for us to kind of go back and look and understand, well, were those the right things for us to ask you to do? And it's often in that space when we give team members, here is the task that we'd like you to do to achieve this outcome. They often come back and say, well, I think we could do it better, or I think we could do it differently. And so it emboldens them to understand, this is what I'm doing, this is the outcome it's meant to have, and potentially identifying any disconnect that maybe senior leadership or management hasn't predicted or seen.
Yeah. So teams are having this process thinking mindset and they're identifying areas for improvement. How do they influence senior teams or the broader organization to be able to adopt some of these ideas and initiatives that they've got?
Yeah, it certainly is. It comes into the way that we really work as a team. And so we'll talk a little bit later about duck ups. And for us, it's really about the team feeding back when things are working and when they're not. And for us to take that, sometimes we take it on the fly and we adapt and change things as we go. Sometimes they form part of an annual kind of session where we bring everything together that we think is working and what isn't, and try to kind of identify those items in the moment if we can. But yeah, it's not always a perfect system in that way.
Yeah, maybe even drawing on the experience of how you've got your teams involved, and if it is related to the duck ups, which I'm quite interested. And obviously, being a creative agency, no surprise that you've been creative in terms of the language you use. But how do you get teams to adopt a process thinking mindset? And what tips would you recommend for our listeners to be able to do it with their teams?
Yeah, I think for the first part is helping them simply understand how they connect and how they're a part of the greater overall goal. So often we find that there'll be a vision in a company, and a lot of employees have a difficult time understanding how it is the work that they do contributes to that vision or mission or aligns with the values of that business. For us at Chunky Duck, that OKR framework is tied into everything about their role. It's part of their job description, and understanding the parts of their business that it's linked to. It's linked to their development plans and the areas that we need them to improve within the business. It forms part of your weekly or fortnightly one-to-ones with your manager. And for a large part, it's something that we talk about a lot. And as we are fully remote, a lot of the team members have a significant amount of autonomy. And often the problems are not always of their own doing, but are certainly something that they have the ability to influence and change, and helping them see that they can improve the issues within the business, or that they can take that initiative and make their lives better, is often really all we need for them to kind of see the advantages of focusing on process thinking.
Mm. Well, I guess if they can see the value, and I love the connection between connecting your teams to the purpose of the organisation or the work, but also like building it into your systems and processes from a goal setting framework for OKRs as well as with people's development plans. I think that's quite critical. So I've got to ask, what is a duck up?
A duck up is a tongue in cheek way of calling out a mistake, really. Whether that mistake is yours or someone else's or a client's, it's really a way for us to be vulnerable as an agency. In previous businesses that I've worked in, talking about your mistakes is not something that leaders often wanted to champion. I feel quite counter to that. I am a big believer in vulnerability and sharing, either when you don't know the answer or when you've done something wrong, as in doing so often empowers others within your team to step up and either help or take control or provide some direction. And so that duck up session is it's a Slack channel that we constantly add messages to. It's a meeting that we run every fortnight. Really helps feed our process system. It's giving us that continual feedback throughout the year of what's working, what's not. Is that as planned? And do we need to maybe pivot mid-year to focus on different initiatives that are now become more important than the ones we outlined maybe 6 or 9 months ago?
Yeah, I love that because you learn from your mistakes and you learn from your failures. But do you also celebrate successes as well? Do you have I don't know, a creative opposite of duck up, but
Yeah, we certainly do. So we have Thankful Thursdays, and on Thursday, everyone is empowered to give kudos to other people on the team. It's a little app that we use via Slack. You can give coins to team members and call out different things to say thank you for the work that they've done. It's very intentionally scheduled the day after the duck ups session, as sometimes talking about mistakes while being vulnerable is a positive thing in the long run. the next day to kind of also be able to share that love from within the team is something that I've really come to enjoy and appreciate. And it's also a really great way for us as leaders to give feedback when we see people aligning with our values or going above and beyond that maybe isn't noticed, especially in a remote setting, as often those type of behaviors just simply get missed because you're not in the office to see someone else doing it.
Yeah, awesome. And I think that's so important because I think it's the intentional, like creating intentional moments to actually learn from our mistakes, learn from our successes, and kind of reinforce the things that we expect is so important. So you've talked about vulnerability, but what is your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, I believe that every individual has the propensity for success and that it's really their environment that plays the biggest impact on whether or not they achieve their potential. That can be their financial environment, social, physical, mental, everything. It leans very strongly, again, into process thinking of, well, I may not be in the office with them, but I can certainly control whether they have a nice working space at home, whether they can sustain themselves financially, whether they have a healthy culture that supports their mental health. And so I really believe that it is the environment that dictates so much of whether we are successful in our lives. And yeah, it's a big part of how I try to lead.
Yeah, it's creating that environment, like a leader being the gardener, to look at all the different factors that are at play, which kind of links to the process thinking that you're talking about. In your experience leading a fully remote team, how can other leaders do that effectively? What are some tips that you've got to make it work effectively?
Yeah, it was quite a tough transition going from being an in-person manager to a remote manager. There's really two areas that I probably struggled with the most. The first was getting access to information that otherwise I could simply tap someone on the shoulder for, instead trying to find a way where I could surface that information without needing to ask someone for it. So that was a really critical part at first, was simply being able to see overall performance numbers and having that reporting dash that helped me understand that things weren't on fire and everything was okay and relieve some of my own anxieties. The other part too was I really had to change the way that I managed and focus far more on outcomes than I had previously. I think one of the key parts about being a remote manager or a leader is that micromanagement is almost impossible to do remotely because you just don't have that constant connection with other team members and you really have to trust in them to achieve the results. This took me a little longer than I would have liked to realize for myself. But once I stopped trying to solve all the problems and instead really began sharing, well, this is the outcome that I want, or this is what success looks like, it was a life changer for me. It really helped me work through others. My day's now far more focused on helping the team have what they need to succeed and far less on actually trying to solve the problems for clients or for the agency itself, and instead just empowering the team members that are far better at it than I am.
Yeah, I feel like that's always this aha moment of letting go and not having to have all the answers, which is almost a relief as well, that we don't have to have the answers, and how can you lead others to achieve the outcomes. You used a word around connection and the fact that you don't have the same connection when you work remotely. How have you created intentional connection in your organization?
Yeah, it's some ways we tried worked really well and some didn't. Probably the best one and one that I've seen adopted by a couple of our clients is something that we call open office hours, which is similar to what you'd have as an open door policy in an office where you can walk through that door and have a chat at any moment. At a set time each day, we open a channel in Slack with a huddle, and it's just simply open office hours, which is you can come in and just have a chat. You can work through a problem with a senior manager, or you can just simply sit there and listen to the conversation while other people are working. And it's just created this beautiful system where maybe people that are feeling a little bit isolated or maybe a little bit lonely at home and need some extra stimulation and energy to bring them back up can join that chat. Whether they choose to engage or not is up to them, but it's certainly a way to reconnect with people in the team. And we absolutely love it. Each one of our directors, so the three of us, all run scheduled times throughout the week that you can catch up with us and come say hello and just have a chat. And we find them to be hugely engaging and an exceptionally good use of our time.
And is it a video or is it like a typing chat?
It's a video. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
a like a Teams chat or a Gmeet. It's just within Slack and it's just a huddle and anyone can join. Sometimes you'll just sit in there by yourself for 15 minutes until someone else join. Sometimes you might have 6 or 7 people in there all having a conversation. And yeah, it definitely varies each day depending on who's around and meeting conflicts and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, awesome. Beautiful. So it sounds like you've got a few different things, including that session, as well as your duck ups and your thankful Thursdays as well. Thinking about remote teams, because I think there has been a bit of a pull for bringing everyone back into the office and you've got a fully remote team. What are some lessons learned? What's worked really well for you and anything that went completely wrong when you've
Yeah.
moved to a fully remote team?
Yeah. What went really wrong was trying to replicate events that would happen in person online. So, example might be a Christmas party. In agency land, the Christmas parties are often quite wild, should I say? And trying to replicate a similar type of environment over a video call when really only one person can talk at a time just doesn't work well. And so they're things that really don't transfer across well. We learned pretty quickly that it had a lot to do with the type of person that we recruit as well. And so that's something that I think we've really gotten right in the last probably 2 years is identifying that there are a lot of people that want to work in an agency style business that don't like being in person in an agency. I'll give you an example of myself. Every agency I've ever worked in had an open office plan and everyone was in the same room. I found that so hugely overstimulating. I was distracted continuously. I got to this point where you'd have to put like headphones on and bury into your computer just to get any work done. And for me, it was often those days at home, I was far more productive and did a lot more deeper thinking and deeper work. We've come to recognize that has a lot to do with whether that's your introversion or extroversion. Some people will thrive in an open office environment, and some people will thrive in a work from home environment. And for us, it's certainly an introverted person that works far better in remote, where having time to process their thoughts and do deep thinking is what they truly enjoy rather than being in an open office. And really, a lot of the team members that we have are people with incredible histories and experience out of agency land, but simply found that it just wasn't a healthy working environment for them. And they were coming home depleted, exhausted, and it was finding simply a different working situation that worked well for them. And they're now able to really concentrate deep on their work and deliver work that in less time, enjoying it more in a far more fulfilling fashion.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's a good learning as well. So, what have you done for people within the teams that are more extroverted? How have you ensured that they don't get depleted from not having enough contact?
Yeah, probably safe to say that I don't think we have many extras, maybe one or two out of the 15 that we have. And those people are naturally in roles that have more engagement. So things like being an account manager or project manager, where you're not just interacting with the internal team, you're also interacting with clients. So for some of our team members that just work on client work, they may have one catch up meeting huddle in the morning with their team and then have 7 hours of working by themselves and thoroughly enjoy that. Whereas the extroverted people are in more client facing roles. And so while they'll have that internal catch up, they might also have 2 or 3 different client interactions. They may have more internal interactions with team members. And so it's really about helping those people that do have more extroverted behaviors work in a role that kind of suits that as well.
Yeah, awesome. So, when you overlay process thinking with working with a remote team, what does your weekly rhythm look like with the team?
Yeah, we maintain a pretty consistent rhythm that you would see in most agencies. So we have a Monday all hands where everyone comes together. You'll have a weekly or fortnightly one-to-one with your manager. You have client meetings, you have client billing work. So a lot of that is still very similar. I think for us, where it really diverges is how and where you spend your time internally. So in our business model, it's always about billable work versus non-billable work. A lot of the time, that non-billable work is seen as dirty or unwanted or wasted, and you should be doing as much client work as possible. For us, all of our team members really know exactly what areas of the business they're responsible for improving. And that internal time is often as structured as their client work would be. When you speak to your manager in your one-to-one, you'll spend just as much time talking about the work that you're doing for clients as you will talk about the internal work that you're doing to improve, whether it's the way that your business unit operates, the services and the workflows of how they work, a whole range of different areas is probably where it changed a fair amount.
Mm. And so, how have you changed the culture around that? Because I know a lot of our listeners are in professional services, whether they're environmental consultants to lawyers to accountants. And the billable hours, when you're doing non billable work, it's sort of frowned upon because you need to get your billable hours up because that's how you become profitable. And in Thriving Teams, my book that just came out a couple of weeks ago, one of the case study organisations was Hive Legal, who have been around for just over 10 years, and they really disrupted the legal firms because they literally got rid of billable hours and they price on value, and they don't even track billable hours in the background. So that's a completely different culture. But when I guess you're still managing the billable hours as well as the internal work as well, it can be challenging not to still secretly focus on the billable hours. How have you managed that culturally? Because I imagine most of your teams will have grown up in that environment where that's really, really important. And how do you set those expectations about non billable work?
Yeah, probably the first part and talking about that utilization metric is many agency-based models or service-based models use that billable utilization. We take it a little bit further and call it effective utilization. And so what can often happen when you're over-optimizing for that type of metric is team members will deliver 2 to 3 times as much as they're meant to on a set price contract. And while it helps the utilization metric look strong, you're actually over-servicing and costing you more money in that sense. So the very first part is we changed how we measured that metric so that you weren't being encouraged to overwork on a client. The second part to that as well was changing the way that we bill. And so while there is still some work that naturally is hours based, probably 70% of our work that we contract now is value-based pricing. And so there isn't that same incentive to just constantly do billable hours to the absolute maximum. And so if you don't need the full-time allocation to deliver great work for a client, the client's happy, we're happy, and you're incentivized to be more efficient in the way you work. Now, I always used to joke that no, we don't buy anyone new computers because you'll work faster and then you'll bill the client less time. We really don't like those types of disincentives. And so for us, it's about trying to deliver work more efficiently over time. This is especially true with AI coming into the world and really disrupting our industry, and all of the work that we do is efficiency now needs to be a major play or will simply be priced out in the coming years. We need to learn how to adapt. And so that's probably a key cultural change, is changing the way that we invoice and bill clients and changing the way that we measure that internally as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I always feel like the opposite's also true in the fact that sometimes when you're working on billable hours, you take intentionally, people take longer to get to a certain hour output. So you actually work slower rather than maybe over servicing. Maybe you plod along rather than actually getting the stuff done efficiently. And so with your teams, you mentioned AI. How are you adopting AI into the work that you do with your teams?
Yeah, I would argue that most of our AI today has been focused internally rather than at a service and delivery level. We've certainly experimented with things like writing content and designing graphics with AI. I would argue that they leave a lot to be desired. And I think these days people are becoming far more savvy at recognizing AI written content or AI generated images. And so we've not really pursued too strongly in utilizing it in our service. Where we've focused it more on is internally and looking at the areas of our work that are less desirable. So let's say the role of an account manager is to build that client relationship. They do agendas, they meet with the client, they write summary meeting notes and send those on to the client. Afterwards, they add tasks to the project management, CRM. All of that work is where we have focused our AI tools. And so things as simple as sending a meeting note taker along with you will help take those notes, summarize it, and share it back with the client. It'll also help draft an email. It'll also help bring those into the task management software. And so those have really enabled our team to not have to spend as much time on that kind of admin level part of their role. It's also mean that as an agency, we've not had to hire an account manager as yet because so much of that function is being filled by AI. And so they're probably the main ways we've used it so far.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Brian. If you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
It'd certainly be to trust in the process. At a foundational level, you really need to trust that your team can do what you hired them for. Micromanagement fails so miserably in a remote setting. focusing on the outcomes of each team member will set you and your team free.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. You've given me lots of ideas for the session that I'm facilitating on Thursday. So lots of ideas bubbling away there. But thank you so much, Ryan, for your time today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Claire. It's been an absolute pleasure.
What really stayed with me from this conversation was about that continuous improvement mindset. I loved the duck ups and actually really celebrating when we fail, because this helps us grow, experiment, and it brings out the best thinking for everybody. At the heart of it, this episode reminds me that small intentional actions compound into a thriving team. If this episode resonated, share it with a leader who would love it too, and follow the show so you never miss an episode. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, facilitation, keynote speaking, or executive or team coaching, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful tips on leadership and team development, as well as our podcast. You can also grab a copy of either of my books on our website, and it's also available on all good online retailers, including Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive. Please subscribe.